It's now 4 o'clock and it's time to start the Transformational Company Explained webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Fish. I'm the Executive Director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. And it is my pleasure to introduce Coro Strandberg, a longtime associate of CBSR, and the principal of Strandberg Consulting. She is the CSR pioneer from early days of the board director and then chair of Vancity Credit Union before Vancity had a social mission in the 1980s. And I've heard Coro make some jokes about shoulder pads at that time. Working with her colleagues at Vancity, Coro helped embed a social purpose into Vancity's corporate strategy and launched the first third-party verified CSR report in Canada. After she retired from Vancity in 2000, Coro set up her CSR consultancy, helping other businesses become CSR and sustainability leaders. These days, she advises companies, governments, and industry associations on accelerated sustainability strategies and supports company boards to enhance their sustainability oversight roles. She received recognition as Canada's top CSR consultant in 2015 by Canada's Clean 50. So with that, I want to hand the presentation over to Coro Strandberg.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Stephen, and I'm very excited to be spending this next hour with all of you. Look forward very much to your questions, your comments, your challenges at the end of the session, as we can perhaps get into a bit of a dialogue about the implications of this approach to CSR moving forward in Canada. So as Stephen has mentioned, this webinar is an introduction to this new business leadership standard for corporate responsibility and sustainability, which we are calling the qualities of a transformational company. I am going to, in our time today, provide an overview of the drivers and trends of this new approach to CSR, profile the business benefits, and provide some suggestions to you on how you can use the qualities in your organization and practice. I will also share some examples of how these qualities are already in use by leading companies around the world. I know we have in the webinar today many sustainability and CSR leaders. Many of you have great programs already in place in your organizations. In fact, perhaps even some of you can give this presentation. What you will find is that some of these qualities are, in fact, standard CSR practice areas and will be familiar to you. However, we are finding that they are being practiced in more transformational ways. As well, there are a number of emerging CSR practice areas, and together they are defining this new CSR leadership standard. And let's just make sure I can advance the slides here. There we go. I am going to just give you a bit of a context as to how these transformational qualities have, if you will, come on the scene. About 10 years ago, we started to hear more and more about these sustainability megatrends. In fact, it was exactly 10 years ago that the World Economic Forum started coming out with its annual overview of global risks, many of which are social and environmental risks to business and societies. And as we all know, these megaforces are, in fact, changing the operating context of business and will affect the ability of companies to compete and thrive. If not directly, then through their supply chain, through the impacts on their customers, the impacts these might have on their business partners or their regions. So in light of these tectonic shifts, companies are starting to rethink their business models to secure and stabilize their futures. I am not going to go over these trends because I'm sure you know them very well, but leading companies are recognizing that without action, the risks from these trends will multiply and opportunities will be lost. So these trends now are starting to catalyze a new approach to CSR around the world, which, as we have seen it, has begun to take shape and started about 5 to 10 years ago. I think I went too many slides along. There we go. So I'm now going to take us into the Canadian scene. This is a visual which many of you have seen, no doubt worked with in your own organizations, of the CSR continuum of practice, from compliance through operational and strategic and transformational. And back in its early days, CBSR used this visual as a way to help companies move along this continuum of practice. About 5 years ago, CBSR's members and other companies started to ask for more information, guidance, and best practices on this fourth stage, the qualities of a transformational company. And back then, there was little known about this opportunity space for corporate social responsibility. And it was about the same time that CBSR recognized that the CSR path that their members were on would not position society to live well within the means of the planet by 2050, given the burgeoning global population moving to 9 billion. So a number of forces came together about 5 years ago, and CBSR realized that they needed to develop these guidelines further on the qualities of a transformational company, guidelines that went beyond these earlier phases of CSR that would accelerate, scale, and innovate practices and business models to enable both business and societal success. In fact, to address the sustainability trends, the risks, and opportunities that I identified in the earlier slide. So CBSR and I started to work together in researching and defining these transformational qualities. We started by conducting a global scan of what were then 20 leading CSR sustainability best practice guidelines and standards: World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the UN Global Compact, the Series 21st Century Corporation, and on and on. There were about 20 of them in practice about 5 years ago. We pulled them all together into one set of ideas, and then we engaged about 36 leading CSR thinkers, visionaries, experts, practitioners, and thought leaders around the world for their advice on these emerging requirements for transformational leadership. And this resulted in the qualities of a transformational company, which was published by CBSR in 2012. Now, I am very sorry to say that there are 19 qualities. We couldn't get it down to 10, and we couldn't get it up to 20, so it's a very rough number. But I am assured with the process we went through that it was very, very thorough to pull together the latest thinking from a global perspective on what these new ideas were about the CSR imperative. So in a nutshell, I'm going to use this slide to make the case as to how traditional CSR is evolving to become transformational CSR. So if we look at the first column of traditional CSR, many companies are working at the level of incrementally reducing their negative environmental and social impacts or giving back to society, all of which is a very good thing and a very, very important first step. However, transformational companies are looking much beyond this thinking, making their overall objective societal value creation, ways to create both the social value and business value through the core business model. Whereas traditional CSR looks for operational efficiencies, philanthropic investments, screening out negative suppliers with negative impacts, etc. The transformational company is actually now looking at its whole of enterprise, its full business model. And rather than screening out products or suppliers that don't meet a certain test of CSR, they're collaborating with them for innovation and new value creation. Traditional CSR companies think that business as usual growth will continue, whereas transformational companies recognize this is not guaranteed. Traditional companies are operating under the paradigm that the external environment will stay the same, whereas transformational companies recognize that these megatrends I profiled earlier are in fact reshaping their operating context. Whereas some companies are still operating with a paradigm that resources are infinite, transformational companies recognize that they're constrained. And traditional companies still believe that customers are not interested in sustainability, whereas transformational companies believe that customers want better, healthier, more efficient and sustainable options, and their job is to help their customers see the way forward. So here I'm now going to give you the landing page for the qualities of a transformational company, and I'm just going to try to sum up for you what is a transformational company before I go into, heaven knows, these 19 qualities. So transformational companies now are acting beyond their direct operations, beyond their four walls, and they are acting beyond the foreseeable future to transition their business models and their operating context to improve prospects for the business itself and for society. And these qualities are putting the company on a path for accelerated and scaled sustainability outcomes, in marked contrast to those businesses who are focusing on practices only in their direct operational control. As Steve indicated, I've been in the CSR game for over 20 years, and I believe that this is a step change from how CSR has been practiced in the past. And with this new paradigm, businesses can now identify ways to go beyond incremental CSR sort of tinkering models to approaches that transform their business model and operating context. But is there a business case for it? Well, needless to say, the top driver for pursuing the transformational companies are, in fact, the risks and opportunities of not pursuing them. Those mega forces outlined in the earlier slide are, in fact, the main driver for contemplating a transformational company model. But here, I'm going to go over what our research has found when we've looked across these 19 qualities and analyzed the business benefits available at a quality by quality level and then aggregate them. These are the aggregated benefits for a transformational approach. Now, before I go over the list, I want to say that these are very familiar to you. They are very similar to the benefits of a CSR approach, if you will. However, as I bring them on the screen, and I think there's about 8 or 10 of them that I'm going to flag, I'm not going to speak to each one of them because they'll be familiar to you, but I am going to just call out the few that I think are even more relevant to a transformational model. A top one being employee engagement, which we know is a benefit of CSR, which is to improve employee recruitment, retention, and productivity, be seen as an employer of choice. Going forward, this is going to be, with labor shortages, this is going to be an even more important business benefit for the transformational company, with millennials looking for businesses to work for employers who are, quote, unquote, making a difference on social issues, to legacy employees, those who are in a pre-retirement age, who are now starting to look for more purposeful jobs. So this is a chance to attract and retain the best and the brightest. Customer satisfaction, again, typical CSR value add, increased customer attraction, engagement and loyalty and advocacy, open access to new markets. Going forward, companies, transformational companies, are really bearing down on how to tap into latent customer demand for brands and corporations to become social leaders and to contribute to addressing societal issues. The next few are quite common. I'm not going to say a lot about it. There's lots to be found, cost savings with some of the qualities, government relations. I want to highlight supply and resource security. Many transformational companies are going this path to improve supply chain security and maintain access to scarce resources, and finally to better manage the price volatility of commodities. So this is a big driver for some companies moving in this direction. As well, innovation, the transformational lens is a very powerful lens on innovation and the development of new products and services. And risk management, which is, again, reinforces that earlier slide on the mega forces, but by pursuing the qualities of a transformational company, businesses are better able to decrease their strategic and operational risk and especially enhance business continuity. Of course, increased availability of capital becomes an important opportunity. And here's a special lens for the transformational company. They're starting to realize that they can only succeed if their operating context is successful, whether that's a healthy community in the case of a local business or a business that recruits locally, whether that's a supply chain question or a customer question, but they're very much looking at their operations, their operational context, and how sustainable, rather than just, if you will, accept some of these negative global trends, they're looking to see how they can pivot them or redirect them to create opportunities for the business and mitigate them in so doing. And then, of course, competitive advantage, and particularly these companies are seeing the transformational project as being an opportunity to build their social license to grow. They realize that with going from 7 to 9 billion people on a planet by 2050, with the growing middle class in emerging markets seeking our consumptive lifestyles, their ability to grow is directly going to be correlated to their ability to improve some of these transformational challenges and opportunities. So, a bit of a tour on the business benefits. Now, I'm going to jump into an overview of who is activating on these qualities. Now, when we first launched the qualities back in 2012, we didn't have these case studies, and over 13 and 14 and now 15, we are assured that this paradigm is really taking off. It is phenomenal, the number of case studies. We cannot actually keep up with the case studies of companies that are moving in this space. Not all of them Canadian, as you will see here, and we think that that's partly because the case studies are not being written about Canadian companies in this area, and of course CBSR is happy to work with you on that, but we have some Canadian examples here. In the Transformational Company Guide, which I'll say a little bit more about later, we profile over 50 companies and over 100 practices, from small to large multinational companies, from co-ops to publicly traded corporations. All are exemplifying these various qualities. Having said that, we're not saying here that they're all exemplifying all 19 qualities. These companies are profiled because they stand out to us for having one or another of the quality which we think is best practice. Now I'm going to review 3 companies, and in so doing, a profile about half the qualities. As I said, there's 19 of them, and I'm just going to give you a feel for about 7 or 8, just so you hopefully can have a sense as to what's going on. We've chosen to bring you 3 brands that will be familiar to you. These 3 brands all have more than one transformational quality at play and seem to be suggesting a bit of a pathway forward, and that's why we've chosen to profile them. Well, no surprise probably to many of you that we would start with Unilever, which is one of the world's largest consumer goods companies with products in the food, beverages, cleaning agents, and personal care products. You will know them for the Dove soap, Lifebuoy soap, Lipton tea, and on, many popular brands under the Unilever banner. Now, a few years ago, I think about 2009 or 10 or so, Unilever hired a new CEO who prior to then had been their CFO, Paul Pullman. And the company was lagging in its markets, was not doing very well, and so Paul wanted to remobilize its employees and its brands and took the company through an exercise which they effectively adopted a sustainable purpose as the core purpose of the company, to make sustainable living commonplace. And in their case, they did that, Paul did that by going back to the heritage, the founding vision for the company at the time, which was in the 1800s when the Lifebuoy soap was first conceived. And the founder, Lever, I think was his name, he had a vision to make washing with soap, or if you will, cleanliness, commonplace. And the social purpose he had at the time was by encouraging people to wash their hands with soap that improved their hygiene and reduced illnesses and premature deaths. And so at the time, it was very visionary and altogether a social purpose. And what Paul Pullman and his company have done has sort of taken that thinking but updated it to today's language. And this is not their sustainability purpose. This is the purpose of the corporation. They have their full corporate strategy is effectively a sustainability strategy, which is to double its business while having their environmental footprint and improving their social impact. That's their main corporate business strategy. So that was one quality of a transformational company, is to pursue the adoption of a sustainable purpose or social purpose for the company as the driver of its corporate strategy. A second quality is to adopt long-term, ambitious visions, even where the solutions do not yet exist. And here are Unilever's 3 big goals by 2020, which when they set them, I think they were 10-year targets at the time. As you can see, these are quite visionary for the company. And what we find of transformational companies is that they are preferring to set long-term goals which are outside of today's industrial operating environment, because it is only in the long term that these innovations can really be brought to market, because it requires rethinking the way business is done. And if you're just thinking quarterly or annually or even 3 years, that's a constraint to rethinking the business or re-engineering your value chain or thinking creatively. So they prefer to adopt long-term goals, firstly, and they also prefer to adopt bold goals, because they're finding that in so doing, it becomes a huge catalyst internal to the company to go look for disruptive and groundbreaking and breakthrough innovations. So transformational companies adopt long-term, bold visions. Transformational companies also move along the path to take full responsibility for their full value chain, and Unilever has done this as well. Their plan doesn't stop at their factory gates. They have taken, as demonstrated here with their greenhouse gas footprint, an end-to-end view of their environmental impact. They accept that they have responsibility for everything from the raw materials that they source to the water and energy used by people when they cook, clean, and wash with Unilever's products, which is what they do. In this case, the bulk of the GHG impacts, notably, are from heating the hot water to use Unilever's products. So that was a bit of a surprise to them. And you could see at the manufacturer level, where in the transport level, which is where Unilever comes in, it's only about 5% of their impact, and over 2/3 of their GHG impact is how customers are using the product. Now, Unilever wants to grow, and they believe that to grow, they have to help their customers reduce the GHG impacts of the use of Unilever's products. And I might say my assessment of, I've looked at a lot of these value chain analysis profiles, and we're finding on average when companies do this value chain look that their impacts, about 50 to 95% of most companies' impacts, especially if maybe this is apart from the even service companies. So I'm just going to make this sum across the board. 50 to 95% of impacts are often found up or downstream of the company's operations itself. So a transformational company doesn't stop, just as I said, with its own 4 walls, its own direct operations. If you would look into its strategy, you will see the company doing this kind of analysis and then developing a stepwise approach to collaborate with suppliers, to educate and engage their customers or collaborate with their customers, and then at the end use of their products to improve their footprints overall. Now, what Unilever is doing here with the water impacts is they are starting to invest in product innovations and reformulations that require less use of water in their use. For example, just to say, dry shampoos or quick wash laundry detergents. And in terms of customer engagement, one kind of fun project that they're pursuing in Europe is to reach out to children through schools to get their family members to take shorter showers. I think the average shower is 9 minutes, and they're trying to use these kids to get their families to take only 5-minute showers and thereby reduce the GHG impacts from the generation of the hot water. So just as an example of how Unilever has taken responsibility for its value chain, and now that has become a driver for customer engagement and product innovation. So we're now here moving to the next example of IKEA. And notably, IKEA also has a variation of a sustainable purpose or a social purpose to create a better everyday life for the many people. That's their corporate purpose. In IKEA's case, they have a sustainable purpose, a sustainable mission, which is to enable millions of people to live a more sustainable life at home. So equally, they have moved in the direction to clarify what's the sustainable purpose of their company, as transformational companies do. So here now is a different quality to profile. First, there's a couple going on this slide here, but the first quality to highlight is the idea that transformational companies work to create a fully sustainable portfolio or product offering. They, in their customer services and products, they approach a total approach to building sustainability into their product lineup rather than just offering a few green options. So IKEA, for example, this fall became the first retailer in Canada to convert its entire lighting range to LED, not just a niche product line. So it's not like you can, here's a green option if you want it. They've made all of their lighting options LED for the customer. As well, they have sustainability in their design approach for all new products. They call it democratic design, and they consider form, function, quality, low price, and sustainability in terms of both how the product is made, but also how it is used by the customer. So transformational companies work to make their customer offerings fully sustainable, firstly, and then secondly, they engage their customers on sustainable lifestyles. So that's another quality of a transformational company. So whereas product development is one side of this, at IKEA, they're also educating and inspiring their customers around more sustainable living. And these are some examples here where they're at the product purchase and in their catalog, they're elevating different tips and ways that the customer can reduce their own sustainability impacts. And here's another very visionary and paradigm shift perspective on everyday CSR, whereby transformational companies are seeking to not just reduce their harms, but to create net positive impacts in society or for the environment. And in IKEA's case, they are seeking to be fully energy independent by 2020 and to produce more renewable energy than they can consume worldwide. And they call this being energy positive or renewable energy positive. And this year in Canada, through a combination of wind energy from a new wind farm in Alberta, they have solar power panels on their store roofs, they have geothermal heating systems and more energy efficient stores. And through this, their companies' operations in Canada now produce more than twice the renewable energy the company consumes. So in this respect, they can become net positive on renewable energy. And this is a restorative company and one of the qualities of a transformational company. Now, I know I would disappoint all of you if I didn't mention interface. And this is my third and final example to profile with you today. So, of course, Interface we know as the world's largest manufacturer of carpet tiles. They, too, have adopted bold, visionary goals, in their case, to close the loop on their operations in terms of their waste and to eliminate any negative impact the company has on its environment by 2020. Long-term visionary goals which they set even before they actually knew exactly how they were going to get there, and they did so to drive an innovation revolution in the company. They have goals to be zero emission, zero waste, and closed loop. And of these, I want to shed light on the closed loop quality, which is one of the qualities of a transformational company. At IKEA, at Interface, they are redesigning their business so that their customers return their used carpets at their end of life, and thereby they can do this to create new carpets, and Interface then gets a closed loop system that for them reduces their dependency on virgin raw materials. And as well, it helps them go off oil for the yarn and vinyl backing of their carpet. So they're putting a lot of R&D into this business model as one of the primary means by which they can, in their case, pioneer the next industrial revolution. And by highlighting that, it was surprising to me, but reinforcing of this idea of a transformational company, to find that Interface talks about pioneering the next industrial revolution on its investor page. They, in their annual reports and their communications out to all their stakeholders, they are committed to using their business to innovate the new business model, a circular economy business model, and in that regard are setting a very strong ambition for their company and their sector overall. So a transformational company, again, sets a bold vision, even when the solutions don't exist, well beyond today's operating environment, in areas where they will need to collaborate with third parties to achieve their goals, and for some companies, close the loop, set an agenda to close the loop on their operation so that they can be a fully circular business. This next and last quality of a transformational company that I'm going to profile by way of a case study is the, if you will, inclusive business model. So this, of the qualities, is the most socially focused of them all, whereby an inclusive business adopts, expands opportunities for all populations as employees, suppliers, distributors, and customers. So here, Interface, just to sort of start the story here, they have a global ambition to leave the world a better place than when they began by developing their products in ways that create net positive social and environmental benefits, and to source 100% recycled material for their carpet tiles. So this is now a factor in product design. About 3 years ago, their designers posed a question. They asked, what if we could build a truly inclusive business model whereby we purchase discarded fishing nets from impoverished fishing villages, give them extra income, clean up the beaches and oceans, and create a cost-affordable input into our carpet tiles? How can we be an inclusive business, they asked, and source from suppliers, new suppliers, in ways that create social benefit? These nets that you see here, they last up to 600 years in the marine environment, and the UN estimates there are 640,000 tons of these abandoned nets across the world oceans. Imagine if Interface could find an effective means to tap into that underutilized resource and create a triple win for themselves and society. So they launched a project that they called Networks, and they launched this in the Philippines to pay villagers to collect these fishing nets from their oceans and shores. These nets are then sold to their yarn supplier, which takes those nets and they turn them into the nylon yarn that can be reused in Interface's carpets. Here's a carpet that has resulted from this Networks project, and as a sort of a iconic image, they're trying to create an imagery here of an ocean and the waves and the ripples on the ocean, just to sort of create a symbolic map back to the underpinning of this carpet tile. So as a result of this initiative, so far, nearly 1,000 households have been engaged with the program. And Interface sees this as a major foray for themselves into this idea of an inclusive, restorative business, and they have ambitious plans to keep expanding this initiative into other countries. So those are examples of the qualities in action. There are, as I said, 19 of them. I'm just going to give you a feel, mostly by way of a title, for all of these qualities so you can see how they come together. And then I'll give you some examples of how you can perhaps start to use these qualities right away. So I've given you lots of examples, or 3 anyways, of how companies are starting to embed sustainability into their core purpose. And I've given you some examples of how these companies are rethinking their product and service offerings from the bottom up. In fact, I just read today that DuPont has recently adopted what they call a sustainable innovation goal, and they're planning to challenge all their products in the pipeline to contribute to a safer, healthier, more sustainable world. So this is the sustainable innovation on the customer offerings. And then solutions-oriented, I gave you some examples of this, but this is where the company tackles social problems, you could say environmental problems, through a profitable business model, and thereby make a sizable impact on major social or environmental problems as part of their competitive strategy, not part of their philanthropy, if you will, but as part of their core business model. And then the idea of becoming net positive, regenerative, restorative, going beyond zero harm to creating net positive benefits for society, that 4th quality there. Here, there's a cluster of qualities under what we call how you do it. And this is really a paradigm shift way of thinking of how companies are now starting to engage the value chain for sustainability overall, and by doing so, they're setting these long-term visions. Here's a very sort of familiar area to you, sustainability, governance, and culture, but they take that to quite a powerful level of board engagement and a full embedment throughout the company. Enlightened leadership, where CEOs and the C-suite, maybe even the chair of the board and others at the leadership level proactively engage in the public dialogue about the need to catalyze a sustainable future for business and society. Employee engagement here is taken to a level whereby not only does the company have thriving, diverse, and participatory equitable workforces, but employees become champions of sustainability at work, at home, and in the broader community. The inclusive business I've described, and that's the social lens, where all populations are given opportunities as employees, as suppliers, distributors, and to customers. The closed loop example I profiled with Interface. Resource productivity is a rethinking of how the product is produced with a very heavy focus on dematerialization. Value chain influence, that example I gave you of Unilever looking up and downstream to find out where its main impacts were and then collaborating there for benefits to all. And then stakeholder accountability and transparency, and the guide, the qualities take that to another visionary level than is seen commonly today. And then the last suite of qualities, this area of collaborating, which is another very powerful frontier for CSR, for companies who embrace this transformational model, who accept that for their success, let's say in the medium to long term, or perhaps the success of their suppliers or their customers, they realize that they have to actually collaborate outside of their four walls with people who are not on the payroll, as it were. So these companies are collaborating with their customers, let's say their business-to-business business models. They're working within their industry sector to innovate, create best practices, and then help their own industry set standards for sustainability so the whole sector can become sustainable together, which for many is an imperative because you can't do it on your own oftentimes. Equally, these transformational companies are involved in multi-stakeholder collaborations with NGOs and governments and academics and community representatives and others to tackle significant social and environmental issues. The finance community is also an interesting one here. This is a company that's proactive with investors, bankers, insurers, stock markets, and others to proactively speak to the business case for sustainability and to engage the broader finance community to see the economic benefits of this visionary business model. They equally, as much as they're engaging customers, many of them also have a platform to engage the public, largely on sustainable lifestyles as well. And last, but certainly not least, transformational companies, as many of us see, especially with COP underway this week, more and more businesses are becoming proactive with government, not to protest government measures, but to call for government leadership on significant issues where the business, not only will the business benefit, but society will benefit if government can bring about a level playing field or create an enabling policy environment to help businesses make the right solutions and their customers as well. So just a comment or two about what this all adds up to, because I just went through 19 things fairly quickly. What I find is that these companies, all of whom have a good underlying CSR foundation, if you will, but they're taking it to another level. What they are doing all in is working to put their company on the path to be a force for good through their core business model. Equally, they are all working externally to improve their operating conditions. They are, for the most part, starting to engage their value chain, recognizing that they can only be successful if their value chain is successful. They can only be sustainable if their value chain is sustainable. And they are re-engineering their business to decouple their growth from their environmental impact. So all in, these are the kinds of practices which these companies are in pursuit of. So, a couple of tips for how you can use the qualities, and CBSR and I were interested in your own stories about how you may use them. I have found that these are the ways that I've already started to work with them because I've had these qualities for the last couple of years, so I am definitely using them when I engage with companies in terms of what does CSR leadership look like today. So I can say with great certainty that this, at the least, is a very handy resource to anyone who wants to understand global best or next generation CSR practices. So in any of these 19 areas, if you get a question, well, what does, as I often do, somebody will say to me, well, what's best practice in stakeholder engagement? I'll say, well, and by the way, I always have this at my elbow, so I'm just found it, and it's number 13, stakeholder engagement, the stakeholder accountability and transparency. It's like sort of the latest thinking and all the resources and the business case, why it's important, who's doing it, case studies, steps why you can do it, and places to go for further information. So a very handy resource if what you want to do is understand best practices fairly quickly. Equally, so many companies, when they develop a CSR strategy or update when they develop one or update a CSR strategy, they want to benchmark their company to find out what does best practice look like. Well, you can still, of course, keep doing that, and you could look at these 19 qualities because they do represent best practice whether in your sector, whether in your region, or perhaps in another region or another sector, but they give you a handy reference for understanding what some of these qualities are, and then you could set about perhaps to address the gaps if you feel that they're important to you. Equally, many times in developing a sustainability strategy, there's a stakeholder consultation phase, and these qualities can be used to ask your stakeholders which of these would be most important, which of these are most successful for success for your business, and you can use them in that fashion when you consult business leaders or stakeholders, and you are asking them what kind of a leadership role would we want to play here, or do we think that perhaps our competitors might be doing these things and do we want to get ahead of them? Or do we want to get ahead of government who might be looking to upping the standard expectations in our sector? Or do we think our customers might be looking to us for these kinds of qualities? As well, it's a very handy reference tool for board and leader education and strategy sessions. More and more boards and executives are trying to understand CSR and what that means for them. So this becomes a handy tool for that kind of education and strategy. And of course, when designing or updating your strategy, if you were doing either of these things, you could, at the least, as you've got your draft in place, you could just sort of check over this list and see if any of these warrant being included in your upcoming sustainability strategy. And something I think will be more significant going forward, you can use this as a tool to work with your industry association. And why is that? We can probably all accept that all sectors will need to become sustainable in the future. And so industry associations have a prime opportunity to take these ideas and educate their own members around next generation practices in sustainability. And perhaps even the industry association may want to create a roadmap by which more and more of their members can move in this direction and create a platform for members to collaborate in areas where they have common boundaries and which are perhaps in a pre-competitive space. And so, in fact, I use these guidelines as a tool for helping industry associations look for 1.0 practices in CSR to 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and maybe the industry association might want to become pursue transformation themselves and help more and more of their members move into that sort of 4.0 transformational space. Now, I actually know people who have used these qualities, so here's some kind of fun other ways, but I know somebody who used these qualities to prepare for a job interview. She wanted to know quickly what were all the best practices so she could wow the people on the hiring committee. So that was handy to her. I know somebody else who decided to change their job title from sustainability manager to transformational manager. And I know a CEO of a company recently who was exposed to this thinking, and he told me he went back to his office to launch an inquiry into how he could develop the social purpose for his company. So going forward, there'll be lots of different innovations and ways by which all of you hopefully will feel inspired and motivated to check this out and see how they could be relevant to your own business path. So just to wrap things up, and then I'll turn it over to Stephen for your comments or questions. You're probably aware that now there is this guide, which for now anyways, is a definitive go-to resource, benchmark, and checklist if you want to know what these new ideas are in CSR leadership. With this guide, there's now advice for implementing these qualities. Each of these qualities are defined in a deeper way, why they're important, what are the business benefits, who's doing them, further resources. And together, these qualities reveal a new way of thinking about CSR and corporate sustainability. And now they give you a bit of a roadmap for the role that business can play to contribute to a sustainable future. And if that's not enough, on the website, you will be able to, there's a PDF of each of these chapters, so you could think of them that they're actually 19 standalone chapters or a long 100-page ebook, if you will. And there's a 2-pager at a glance if you want something to print out and have handy, as you're developing your sustainability strategy. There are about 10 or 12 webinars that you can tap into, which the Conference Board of Canada has hosted on many of these qualities. And equally, you can take these ideas and apply them to social or environmental attributes. So there's an example on the website for transformational water leadership. So all 19 qualities applied to water. And there's an example of how these qualities can be applied to an industry association, which might want to help their members move forward on a path. So many different ways that these qualities can be applied. And I must say, since I started working with them, I find it's very difficult to go back to an old way of thinking. And I'm finding that this kind of 1.0, 4.0 is a very kind of handy way of looking quickly at how a company can go from sort of operational practices to transformational practices. And not to say you'd have to do all 19 of these things, and certainly not all at once. Some of them will be more relevant to you than others, but it certainly is an opportunity to build your business and create a secure future for society as well. Stephen.
Thanks, Cora. I appreciate it. That was a great introduction to the Transformational Company Guide and framework. And I'll take this opportunity to mention that CBSR will be hosting deeper dives into the individual qualities as separate webinars moving forward. So there are 19 qualities. We're trying to do at least one of these a month. So for the next sort of year and a half, we will continue to advance the Transformational Company and share more of those case studies. Also, if anyone's on the phone that is interested in becoming more actively involved in the development of this guide and the maturation of this guide, if there's any interest in sourcing Canadian case studies, if you have access to any funding for additional research, or if you feel that you embody one of the qualities yourself and you'd like to be profiled, please reach out to us. We'd like to hear from you. So now, thanks again for all of you for joining us. We had a really wonderful response to this webinar, and I think that that's a testament to the strength of Coro's research and the relevant nature of the Transformational Company qualities to all of you. So thank you for joining us. In the WebEx screen that you're currently looking at right now, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a section for Q&A. So you can type questions into that field there. There's also a chat feature, but just below that is the question and answer section, so you can post your questions there. And we'd like to take any questions from you now. And if anyone's typing there, I'm going to be receiving the questions indirectly. Yeah, we'll just hold on for 2 seconds and see if there's any questions coming in. I should also mention, while we're waiting for you to find the Q&A box and submit your questions and have them relayed to me, that the Globe Foundation and Globe's 2016 plenary includes some of the transformational company thinking in their early plenary that they've shared with us already. So if some of you are planning on going to Globe 2016, there is you'll see some of these themes reemerging throughout the course of the week. So I look forward to sharing some of those sessions with you as well, and want to thank Globe and the Globe Foundation for pulling us together and for using this resource and sharing it so freely. Okay, so I've got my first question in. Thank you for your patience. The first question in is, how can you make sure that fulfilling the qualities are enough to suggest that a company is transformational?
Well, many of these qualities transform the business model or transform the operating context, and in so doing are catalytic. And by becoming catalytic outside the organization, and in the case of employees, with employees at work, at home, and in the community, become generative of a sustainable ethic and a paradigm shift in society, broadly speaking. So that's the way in which it becomes transformational in a significant way. And just if I can highlight something I often come across in my work, I come across sort of an ethic that says, well, there's nothing I can do, we don't have any influence. And so companies sort of, you know, barricade the doors or whatever when they realize that there's nothing they can do, and I imagine they're waiting for somebody else to do something like government or whatever. But this sort of puts that notion of, you know, I don't have influence, it puts that on its head. And so that's a sort of a shift in perspective when you sort of all of a sudden say, well, what is my influence, or can I work with my industry association, or can I collaborate with a supplier, or work with somebody in the community, or collaborate with a customer, whatever. When you sort of go away from that sort of fatalism to looking to the channels that you do have, the simple act of doing that, I believe, is transformational on its own. And when that, and if that could be done on a scale, will be, of course, will create that tipping point that we're all looking for.
Thanks, Coro. Second question.
Yeah, let me just, there's another question. But having said that, if you think, if somebody who asked that question, or if any of you think we've missed equality, please let us know. But these are the ones that keep playing out time and time again over the last 3 years. But by all means, let us know if we've missed one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that that question was more focused on whether it was sort of a validation by fulfilling the quality. Do we have the license to suggest that someone is transformational? And I think you addressed that earlier in that no one company is doing all 19 things. There are certainly a few companies that you highlighted that have led and are certainly exhibiting multiple qualities, but no one's achieved perfection or total transformation or transcendental CSR. I think that might be what the question was getting at. Do you have any further comments on that, or should I move to the second question?
I'll go to the second one.
Will do. Second question, what are your thoughts on implementing a transformational approach in an economic downturn?
Well, naturally enough, I would have a view that one would continue, stay the course. But then, you know, it begs the question, well, how do you go about doing it? It's just, I find if you think about it at the level that I was somewhat suggesting, you know, the influence that you have in your day-to-day roles, and that your professionals have and your functional groups have, and that the roles you have with professional associations or industry associations, like some of the investments can be done perhaps by other people, or you can kind of share the investments with others. The thing is about a downturn in an economic cycle is that there's likely, if it is in fact a downturn, it suggests that there will be an upturn. And if there is an upturn, you want to have continued your innovation and your investments in innovation along the way. Sometimes that can be a good time to do the innovation. People can better recognize the need for it to come up with some, you know, new ways of conceptualizing business opportunity. So it actually, there could be perhaps some advantages. I recognize that there can be resource constraints, so I understand that that's the significance of the question, but I think that even under the radar, this could be a good time to be building. Collaboration takes a while to be successful, so it could be a good time to be investing in sort of baseline collaboration, or identifying on your value chain who it is that you might want to be working for, and putting together some small steps in which that you can invest in later phases.
Thanks, Coro. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Are there any last questions before we move on? Oh, I think I'm getting one more now. Bear with me 1 second. I would just ask my colleague if you could send me that question directly to my phone. That would be helpful. I seem to be stalled. Apologies, everyone. I think there is one more question that's come in. I'm just having trouble retrieving it at the moment. Here we are. So, final question. I think we'll have to wrap it up after this. What are the metrics to determine what fair and equitable is?
So that's the quality of employee engagement. And the person who asked that question, and in fact, any metric question, it might even be a definitional question. I really encourage you to go back. I encourage you to check out the quality, which is created in chapter form and is available as a handy reference. So, Stephen, it would take some doing to get into that in any substantive way, except to say that that could well be defined in the quality itself, and I encourage you to look there.
Yes, I think that's probably a good time to reinforce the additional detail that's included in the individual chapters that focus on each of the qualities, and by extension, the larger guide, which is 100+ pages worth of information. There are many, many case studies, examples of best practice, and certainly it points to what metrics and how people measure and monitor their progress as well. So that's all included in the guide. Okay,
and
with
maybe, Stephen, if I might just say this, though, to that question, because I could imagine lots of questions like this. I will tell you, all of these 19 qualities, if and when you go there, if you've got the time to check them out, they do define a very progressive mindset. They do take sort of an advanced view as to what all of these things could mean. They are designed to go beyond everydayism in business and even to go beyond everydayism in CSR. So I can assure you that they are quite kind of robust ideas, and as far as we could, they give you an idea as to what is upcoming as a sort of a visionary stance in all these 19 areas. So it is, best, but mostly next generation practices, and will help you in a strategy session see around the corner, basically.
Right, and I apologize. We'll have to cut it off there. I had one question that came in late, but we'll have to manage that offline because we're at the limit of the webinar. It's now actually 5:01. If you do have any other questions or you're just feeling shy on the call, please feel free to email Coro or myself with your follow-up questions. We'll be happy to respond personally. And as I said, please keep an eye out on CBSR.ca and through our partners at the Conference Board for future webinars focused on the transformational company. And I want to personally thank Coro for all of her time invested in the development of this for CBSR. And I want to thank all of you for spending some time learning a bit more about it today. Thanks again, everyone.